We have a great educational roundtable conversation today. Super excited to be discussing the environmental aspects and responsibility that lie out there. Unfortunately, this topic just doesn't get as much attention as DOT and OSHA. However, equally important. And too often companies find out after the fact what they should have done or what they had to do. And at that point, it's too late, right? Either large insurance claims have happened, large fines are dished out, and it's just a mess afterwards. That's where y'all come in to clean it up. Or before too, to mitigate as well.
We would much rather be on the proactive side. That would be part of the discussion.
So that's what this is about today. We want to bring awareness to this topic. Super important. Can affect almost any business, any individual as well. A lot of time people don't seem to think that. So I want to bring awareness to that aspect of it. And so the goal today is to provide a look at the environmental compliance to help ensure that your business and operation meets the regulatory requirements that it needs to and understands those associated liabilities that come along with it, no matter what industry you operate in, okay? It's awesome. We have two highly regarded individuals in this room with us today that we're super excited to have. Great, thank you for being here. Highly respected in this field, so they got a lot of knowledge to share. So I'm pleased to introduce Lisa Bruderly to my left and Jeff Walentosky to my right. So I'll give you a little bit of background on him. So I'll get through this really quick and then we'll get into the program. So Lisa is an environmental attorney, 23 years with Babst Calland. Her experience is with water-related compliance issues, and she also has 9 years environmental consulting experience prior to becoming a lawyer. She's a shareholder and past chair of the environmental group at Babst Calland, and every day she advises clients regarding wastewater, stormwater, streams, wetlands, and spill prevention and response. She regularly negotiates with U.S. EPA and state environmental agencies. Jeff, from Moody and Associates, joined there in 1990, worked through the ranks, become the president of that organization, February of 2017. In 2018, Jeff became president, CEO of the organization and majority shareholder. He's a licensed professional geologist in Pennsylvania and New York, and maintains his administrative duties for Moody, and also remains active in assisting clients with commercial, industrial development, municipal, and energy-related projects. In addition, he remains active in numerous industry organizations and work groups. In 2019, Governor Tom Wolf appointed Jeff as a Citizens Advisory Council's representative to the PA DEP Oil and Gas Technical Advisory Board. He also currently serves on the board of directors for the Pennsylvania Independent Oil and Gas Association, PIOGA, Washington County Chamber of Commerce, and the United Way of Washington County. So again, I want to remind everybody that this is conversational today and is designed to be interactive. So the format encourages participation and collaboration. So feel free to ask any questions at any time. And people that are on via Zoom, also feel free to, in the chat section, in the Q&A section, feel free at any time to throw a question out there as well, okay? So without further ado, Jeff, Lisa, let's hear some good stuff about environmental responsibility.
Yeah, Brandon, thank you. Appreciate the invite from Seubert this morning, and good morning to everybody. I think the big thing when we started to collaborate on this was exactly what Brandon talked about. This is going to be a conversation and the discussion. I'm a pretty informal person. I don't want to read off this presentation. We get some guidelines for this presentation, but this is more a discussion between Lisa and myself, where we will involve all of you online. Certainly Brandon will be part of the discussion as well. Lisa, any comments before we get started from your standpoint?
No, it will be more useful to everybody if, like Jeff said, if you have questions or you have something specific, feel free to bring it on.
Yeah. So I think when Lisa and I were developing this slideshow I mean, you'll see this this first slide, and truly this hits home, because I think it goes back to some of the items that Brandon talked about in his introduction there. And if you don't mind, I'm going to probably stand up and wander around a little bit. But to me, it's ignorance is no excuse when it comes to environmental compliance. These were just a few things that Lisa and I listed on things that we have actually heard from our clients.
And typically when we hear this is after a regulatory agency has called them or come to their site, and
or they've received a nice letter,
received a letter, or
says you have a notice of a violation or violations,
right? Or a complaint from a landowner or a citizen suit or any of those sorts of things, and they call, and maybe they really haven't considered their environmental compliance obligations up until that point, like they should have. And you know, a lot of it is just like, well, I had to get moving on my site development. I didn't have time to wait for that permit. Or do you know how much that costs? I don't have time to deal with this or that. Or it's my property, I can do whatever I want to with it, which I still hear, which still shocks me.
Yeah, and that one, I think, with Lisa listed that one's probably the most dangerous of all.
Yeah,
it really is.
And especially when you tell that then to the agencies, they really don't like that. And so that's why I think Jeff and I pulled these out with 5 minutes or so. We can think of a whole bunch of excuses that people come up with, but none of those excuses are going to be anything that the agencies are going to take, especially, and maybe we don't even have this one up here, of the agency came out and they didn't have a problem with it, or some guy told me it was fine. Well, too bad. Like that doesn't cut it. And so that's all things that if this is what you're relying on, you should reconsider.
And I know, and I told the gentleman I was maybe going to look to him for I know we have two environmental consultants, one online and one here in our room, because I think you've probably have heard many of these same items as well. So I think, like I said, that I didn't know I had to do this is just that's a rough one for me to take. We're gonna go into some further details about being a good Boy Scout, being prepared, and knowing your obligations. And I think that's a big part of where Lisa and I come in, but also a qualified, whether it's an environmental professional like this gentleman here, or legal counsel, much like Lisa, that advises clients on a daily basis. So I think any questions, and I'll come out to any of you that have any of you come across anything like this. I mean, maybe I'll look to you, Rob, since you've.
Oh yeah. I mean, I smiled as soon as I saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And agencies, you're right, agencies don't care. Ignorance is no excuse.
Yeah, it really is. And I think the other item at the very bottom, I get it that, hey, time is money. I mean, you say you're developing a site and you're on a tight time frame. That last one, we don't have time to obtain the required permits. That should all be part of the planning phase of any project, whether it's simple or complex. So, yeah. I threw this slide in here. Lisa and I talked a little bit about this. Phase, I think a lot of people have heard of phase 1 or phase 2 environmental site assessment, or ESA. Usually happens when there's a property transaction, or maybe an entity is maybe refinancing with a lending facility. but that's what, when that is conducted, there's some standards out there by ASTM that are followed for this process. But also, I'll just go through the slide real quick. I mean, you're examining potential environmental obligations, and then you're identifying the environmental professional is identifying basically what I'm going to say is a clean site, or if there are any environmental liabilities on the property. And then as part of an ESA, the compliance issues are really not required as part of an ASTM standard ESA. But go ahead.
I was going to say, just,
please.
you know, and to put in the framework, an ESA is, and the standard, the ASTM standard, is really designed to be able to give you protection from CERCLA. Generally speaking, is there's a bona fide prospective purchaser, or a innocent landowner kind of defense that you can use when you buy a property if it's already contaminated. And so really, when we talk about an ESA, very generally speaking, we're looking for contamination and something that's going to be, you know, existing site contamination in your soil, in your groundwater, or something like that. But we're not looking for, does the facility have the right permits? Are they complying with their permits? Those sorts of things. So the obligations of the ESA is just different than just straight up environmental compliance in an operational setting.
Yeah. For an ESA, I mean, you're generally looking for two things. I mean, you're looking for petroleum products, you're looking for hazardous substances. Even though I think many good consultants will certainly point out compliance issues, notice of violations. I mean, those are red flags to any prospective purchaser. But is it truly required as part of a ASTM ESA? Not really. So.
Do all financial institutions require, like if you have, there was a current site assessment done in recent couple of years, do they all require an updated one before they, is that?
I believe the ASTM standard, believe it or not, is 6 months.
Yeah.
6 months. Yeah, is the update. But a lot of it, I mean, I think, not to say say you did it 2 years ago, they did it 2 years ago. As you know, tons of very, very useful information in that ESA. But I think the big thing is they want to make sure that there's no property use changes. They want to address that, and that's why they should prescribe 6 months. So. But I think the big thing that from our standpoint is, yeah, you may have a clean environmental site assessment on the property. Doesn't mean that you're environmentally compliant on the property, knowing that there are many programs for you, your company, your representatives to be looking at. So next slide.
So
please, Brandon.
Or I was on mute there. Jeff, Lisa, what kind of, as we're getting into this, what is the current state of the DEP? You know, are they hiring? You know, we're hearing a lot of governmental agencies hiring bodies. Is there emphasis programs that are currently happening that people should be aware of?
I'll give you my take. I'm sure Lisa will give you a take as well. I received a notice from Lisa's firm on Friday that DEP Secretary Rich Negrin resigned as of Friday, which very, very unexpected. Taking a medical leave of absence, and then his resignation, I believe, comes into effect in December. Are they hiring? Yes, but I think only in specific areas, mainly in regards to oil and gas. And the reason being is there's a IIJA program, federally funded program for orphan and abandoned wells that is out there that is basically making an inflow of millions and millions of dollars into the Commonwealth for specifically on the plugging of old orphan and abandoned oil and gas wells. So, and Lisa, maybe you've heard the same, but I'm not seeing the hiring of other massive hiring of other programs.
And I think that's also true with the EPA. They have a hard time finding the funds, you know, for like site visits and things like that, and they don't seem to be hiring a whole lot either. But you know, the people that are there have, obviously with this administration, have more leeway than they did with the previous administration, and so we did see a more you know, more enforcement coming down now. And then I mentioned citizen suits before. The citizen groups are really quite active. And with regard to, you mentioned sort of programs and things that were EJ, environmental justice, is something that's really starting to come into play in a lot of state programs, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, other ones, and federally as well. So it's going to be a consideration when you have a new site, when you're doing new development, as you know, with certain permits, the EJ considerations will be triggered with them.
And I think that started, that the environmental justice, that became interim final, I believe, in middle of September. So you're actually, it's a policy document, but they,
yeah. And there's a mapping system.
And they should not regulate by policy, but they do. But there are requirements within that policy to utilize a mapping tool to ensure that your project could be oil and gas, it could be a site development, does or does not fall within a distressed community as defined within the EJ policy. So.
And I think that mapping can be tricky because you can have a site that is, you know, you have a certain buffer around that facility, that property, and depending, because we have so many different municipalities and demographics, that you could be within that circle and be surprised that, you know, a site that is a municipality that you wouldn't consider to be distressed might still fall within that area. So you've got to just kind of check it out and see.
Probably just that discussion probably.
That's a whole
it provides even more confusion on a lot of the environmental compliance topics, but it truly is a piece. And I know that we're going to touch on several subjects today, but we're probably just going to scratch the surface on environmental compliance today. We probably won't have all the answers for the audience today, but I think the big thing from my standpoint is to make you aware and get you prepared. So.
And I think that really is sort of what this slide goes to, is to kind of just acknowledge that it is a complicated issue. It's not, you think it, I have people that I know that think environmental and they don't think it's necessarily all that complex, but environmental has so many different just branches of it out there. So really the purpose of today is to be able to just highlight how many different branches and how many aspects there are, to give you a better idea of to know when you don't know and when you should consult with somebody and ask them, you know, for an opinion or for their thoughts on what might be needed. And this kind of just sets it up for the next piece of the presentation. So it's not just one agency, it's not just the DEP, it's not just the EPA, it's a bunch of different agencies. It's all the different media, it's waste and water and air and everything else that is in there. And it's a bunch of different permits, and unfortunately it's a whole bunch of different acronyms, and Jeff and I could probably talk to each other, would say about 3 full words and have an entire discussion about
just on acronyms.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you're not used to that world, I mean, I think we do live in a world of acronyms, especially when we come to the texting world. But in the environmental world, I mean, it truly is a world of acronyms that you could get lost just in those acronyms from programs, from departments or agencies that you're dealing with. I mean, it can be very confusing, even to a seasoned environmental professional. So
it helps to have the decoder ring.
A decoder ring would be very, very helpful for sure. But as up on the slide there, I mean, there's many acronyms, many considerations, permits, good legal counsel, good environmental consultant, or somebody that just tracks that stuff in-house can point you in the right direction. But I would always try to encourage anybody on the manufacturing side, the development side, energy. I mean, conducting a periodic audit, and don't be afraid to say we have found some failures here, and how are we going to address that? And then I think the big thing that I would have a takeaway on this is next steps is, okay, what's the engagement? Do I go to a consultant? Do I go to legal counsel, or do I even engage with a regulatory official? And I, being proactive with a regulatory official, I think I would rather me be knocking on that person's door than them knocking on our door, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. So
and we have, well, and just we have clients that just, you know, they have an idea for a project and they'll come in and just say, what might the permits be? What might our, you know, limitations are? Here's the location. You know, what do you just see, to kind of get a feel for what that might be? And starting from there and developing that strategy makes the whole process, I mean, there's always hiccups, but makes the whole process go a lot smoother than, oh, we just thought we'd put in this new warehouse and, oh, wait, hold on. Then it, you know, then it doesn't, that certainly doesn't work as well.
Ignorance is no excuse piece.
Yeah. So this is just a little acronym-y kind of slide to talk about the different agencies that are out there. And, you know, federally, you've got the Corps of Engineers. You hopefully don't have the DOJ, but sometimes we do. Fish and Wildlife, we're always interested in species. You know, different people. This SHPO is the Historic Preservation Officer. Fish and Boat, if you got a fish kill, you spill something and fish are starting to pop up. This, I included on local, the Allegheny County Health Department, because that's very unique for Allegheny County in Pennsylvania. They do the air program. So if you've got an air issue, if you have some sort of air emissions in Allegheny County, that's who you're going to be dealing with. And so it's a whole different ballgame than other areas. We have clients who call us just because we're in Allegheny County and we know the health department. And so just nuances that you wouldn't expect. And then just municipality wise, there's a whole bunch of different things that you can, you know, you can encounter with zoning or noise or access or what you can send down the wastewater to the wastewater treatment plant. They're all just different considerations out there.
Yeah, I once again, I think it's just being aware that to not be afraid to ask the questions, going to these, having a little bit of a game plan. What's our end goal of our project, and then just set out what we feel are the expectations of what we're going to be completing for activities. Like Lisa said, knowing there may be some hiccups along the way that you say you're developing a site.
Lisa, Jeff, so a lot of the times these permits, right, they are contingent upon other permits to be able to get approval for the project to move forward. And so a lot of times we're hearing that permitting offices are behind, or they're running. COVID really has slowed that down, right? Has that gotten any better? Turnaround times of these offices?
I think it probably depends on, from my standpoint, it depends on where you're at throughout the Commonwealth. Other states, West Virginia, Ohio, much more friendly, unfortunately, in the Commonwealth. And I think that was one of the initiatives that Secretary Rich Negrin was on board to try to address, was permitting and permitting reform. Have I seen, I'll say, a little bit of improvement just because it's on the radar, but overall, Brandon, it is a continued issue. I don't know if it.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention more on, like, if you're going to have an impact to a stream and wetland with a core permit, you're going to also, as you mentioned, the requirement to get that core permit for the stream and wetland is going to be, you're going to need some sort of SHPO clearance, and you're going to need some sort of clearance from Fish and Wildlife. And if you if if it hits for a potential species or it hits for a potential cultural resource, that can really slow down your whole process, because then you've got to go out and look for whatever it is.
Hire specialists. Yeah, I'll give an example. I mean, this sounds really strange. Water well drilling project. Drilling a water well. Okay, water well for a municipality. Okay, that sounds like a little bigger operation. Did our due diligence. Did what's called a PNDI search, Pennsylvania National Natural Diversity Index search, and we had a hit on that search, and it was the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake. And so what does that mean? You take your shovels out and go looking for the rattlesnake? No. Actually had to hire a qualified herpetologist to go out and deem the area either safe and no habitat, but it came up, and it's just one of those due diligence things that we had to go through to ensure that we were in compliance.
Yeah,
just a simple example.
Yeah, I had a site in West Virginia, and most of West Virginia is in the buffer zone for the Indiana bat and a couple other bats as well. And so we had a site where there was a pipeline slip, and the slip was going into the stream, but there were two trees that were roosting trees for the bat, so we couldn't get the slip out of the stream until it was out of the roosting season for those two trees. And so, it was, you would have thought the agencies would have been more concerned about the stream perhaps, but that didn't work out that way. And so we had to delay what we were doing as far as construction and fixing with parts of the slip to be able to accommodate the bats. So I
have a similar story. I went through a construction project, and it involved almost all of these acronyms, if you will. And to get to the Army Corps of Engineers, I had to get Fish and Wildlife permit, and couldn't start construction until a certain time frame because of the spawning of a certain fish. So with that being said, we're kind of thinking about proactive and talking about some of those excuses that you saw on that first slide or second slide that was up there. I didn't have enough time, right? Because time is money, and it really is these days. And so I know every project is different, but when you're looking at starting that permitting process to the last final permit to get the green light to go ahead, what kind of time frame should people be expecting right now?
It could be a wide range. It really
depend on the project.
And I think the agency as well. I mean, some agencies, at least you can have a conversation with. I mean, I don't want to pick on one agency in particular, but I'll give one example. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I have never had any good luck to move a project along. They are pretty much on their own schedule with that agency. But I hate to term it, it's a game, but it's the game that you have to play as part of compliance, because you just can't go charging out there. You don't want the consequences of going against an agency like that. So, and that's where you would need an attorney, a legal counsel that would basically tell you really have got yourself in a very tough position now. So, but yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I was about ready to say before we go on to this slide, we're good, Jenna. But I think that from a standpoint of, you're going to run into unknowns. I have an environmental consultant sitting right beside me here, and how many times have you been on a site development project or a closure project, and we're excavating, or we got plans, we got a timeline, and there's something metal here. Yeah, there's an underground storage tank there. So I mean, and okay, well, we got to take a step back here and assess what we're going to do, and assess, okay, what's the next steps. So I mean, any project when it comes to site development, these type of issues do not, in a heavily industrialized area like Western Pennsylvania, none of these problems surprise me anymore. So, and you find them in areas that you think, how in the heck did they get this tank in this place? What was here before? Part of your due diligence. So considerations, we kind of tried to break this down a little bit, as Lisa alluded to earlier. I mean, we tried to break this down a little bit into sections from the standpoint of air, water, waste on-site, waste off-site, and other considerations. So I mean, air, I am not an air quality expert, nor is Lisa, but we're going to scratch the surface a little bit on air quality, knowing that there are a lot of obligations. I know when I started as a consultant in 1990, I would dabble a little bit in air quality issues. Air quality issues have really evolved where you really have to be an expert in air. That truly is a discipline that it takes a lot of your attention just to follow all the regulations and policies that are out there from a federal, state, but also county-wide with the Allegheny County Health Department. There are a lot of obligations out there. The water side, I mean, it could be something very simple from the standpoint of a discharge to a stream, to water withdrawal, something I deal with quite often when it comes to dealing with different river basin commissions, drinking water. There's a lot of things that you think, how is that an environmental issue, or why do I need a permit for that? That is a big item. Waste, I know that is those two items are something that Lisa deals with quite often. On the residual, municipal, construction, non-hazardous, hazardous waste, then landfills, recyclers, UIC, for those of you that don't know what that is, underground injection control. Those are the areas that they're actually injecting wastewater into the subsurface. And many places in Pennsylvania, EPA is the primary regulator of that. DEP still has a role, but EPA here is the primary regulator of underground injection control. And then probably more on the local side is local, but also stateside are septic systems, depending on the size of those septic systems. And then the last one, endangered species, we kind of covered a little bit of those discussions a few minutes ago on the things that we come across on the endangered species, cultural resources, certainly, and then an item that a lot of people don't think about on the site development side is fill, clean fill. There's actually a policy out there for clean fill. It's a management of fill policy. It was updated, I believe, 2.5 years ago. There's some significant obligations to any developer that if you're moving fill off a site
or onto site.
I try to recommend it to any client. If you can keep your fill on site, that is your best option. But there are obligations to that standpoint from a fill side. So
right. Just a couple of points. When waste on site, each one of those programs has a different set of, liabilities and record keeping and reporting and
a chapter in the PA code.
Right. And some of them have also federal one, residual is a state term, but hazardous waste and some of the non-hazardous waste also has federal regulations as well. And so just as I'm looking at that, Jeff, you had mentioned like things that I put on there that I get questions on that people will say, oh, I didn't even think about that, is like the septic system. Where does your septic system go? Do you have a septic system? Erosion, when they're doing some sort of construction and they don't have, you don't have your filter fabric out or whatever it might be, and you're not protecting the water that's discharging into a stream. And also stormwater, there are there are stormwater programs for construction, or permits for construction for industrial activities, depending on what type of industry you might be. And you know, you just have to kind of, and there's municipal ones as well, but you just need to know that those are out there, because your stormwater, even though it's, you know, it's just runoff on your parking lot, you may still require a permit for it, and you may still be required to do sampling for it, and
potential impacts to the waters of the Commonwealth.
Right.
I mean, yeah, please.
What happens whenever the federal restrictions and state restrictions kind of conflict against each other? Do you take the most restrictive of the two, or what if?
Good thing we have legal counsel here. So
typically, so everybody must comply with the federal standards, but each state can be more stringent. And in most programs, the state DEP has been delegated authority by the federal government, by EPA. And so, for example, like MPDS permitting is conducted through DEP because DEP has been delegated authority from EPA. In contrast, like you were talking about the UIC well program, EPA keeps control of that in Pennsylvania, so you would deal with directly EPA. But even if a facility has been, even if DEP has been delegated, you know, authority under for like a wastewater discharge permit, if EPA has a problem, they can still be part of the enforcement. And they, even if you've settled with DEP, EPA can still actually bring an action if they, depending on who signs off on the original one. So you can have both, but the state can be more stringent. They can't be less stringent than federal.
Yeah, we'll probably get into some of the interaction between federal and state laws and some of these items going forward. So, yeah, there are a lot of considerations, and here's some of them on the air quality side. And the big disclaimer, as I said, we are not air experts here, but there are a lot of obligations, and we're just scratching the surface on air quality here. So,
and I think one of the big ones is if you're building something like a new site that needs an air permit, there are clear obligations of when you can actually start construction and what the start of construction actually is. And that's something that people get hung up on. And so that's something that really requires an air attorney or an air consultant, not me. Yeah.
But I think it all stems from the Clean Air Act. I mean, that was certainly top of the list. But certainly, I think a lot of you have heard about greenhouse gas emissions. That applies across the board to all industries. New source review permitting, Title V reporting, and that's a permit to operate. And then more acronyms on the toxic air pollutants. Best available control technologies and hazardous air pollutants. Like I said, we are just scratching the surface, and I just know that, I mean, depending on your industry, you can really go down the path from the federal and the state side, depending on what your industry or what you're trying to accomplish, what your site activities are, what part of your site activities apply to any air permits. Yeah, go ahead.
Probably one thing, you guys, you're not going too deep in there.
No.
I understand that. I'm not the expert either. One of the things that I ran into recently that would affect many organizations is your emergency electricity generator. Almost all of the buildings have one.
Yep.
They are not directly regulated unless they're over a certain size. Mm-hmm. But historically, if you ran them for up to 50 hours for non-emergency, mm-hmm.
Just operational purposes,
and or up to 500 hours for emergency use, there was no obligation to do anything with regard to the air quality. They just recently put some regulations in where you have to document your running of that system, regardless of how much time is either non-emergency or emergency. You have to have that documentation on site.
Just more record keeping than anything, just to show you're being compliant. So,
and it was not a requirement last,
but now it is.
Very good, yes. And I understand that the agencies are really hammering on this point when they go do compliance inspections, that they really, really honing in on this particular issue and citing people.
And it's a good example because, like you said, I mean, how many buildings? I mean, there's not many buildings out there that doesn't have an emergency backup generator. So it's great point. So we'll move on from air. You want to cover a little bit of this? I mean, this is a lot in your wheelhouse. I'll throw in a few comments here.
So the two big waste programs are really federally are what they call RCRA and CERCLA, and CERCLA is also commonly known as Superfund. I'm sure you've heard of Superfund sites. And so RCRA is very broadly solid waste and hazardous waste, and it's more in the kind of when the waste is generated side of it and disposed and treated. And CERCLA is more of after it's been led to site contamination and site cleanup and things like that. That's super broad, but generally speaking, that's where the difference is between the two. So you'll see RCRA and the state equivalent to RCRA when you're looking at different, how you're generating waste, whatever that waste could be. It could be, cinder blocks. It could be, some sort of, it could be some sort of chlorinated solvent, whatever it could be. It's all going to fall under there somewhere. And the level of regulation and record keeping is going to depend based on what it ends up being. And so the next one is just a bunch of the acronyms for the different types of generators. Usually is based on your quantity, whether you're a large quantity, a small quantity, a very small quantity generator of waste, whether you're a treatment, storage, or disposal facility. So you're a facility that actually, after the waste has been generated, either accepts the waste or treats it on site. Like Jeff talked about with tanks, all sorts of underground and above ground storage tanks. And then one that we both get involved in a lot are the different programs. So if you have a cleanup at a site, if you buy a site or you have a site and you discover contamination on it and you want to clean it up, even though you haven't been necessarily ordered to clean it up yet, you can enter into a voluntary remediation program, and most states have them. PA, Ohio and West Virginia certainly do. And when you enter in those programs, you disclose them to the state, and you come up with an agreement with the state on to be able to meet a certain remediation standard and show that that site is clean to a certain level. And when you do that, you can get certain liability protections for those sites. You may have to put in some sort of land restrictions. You might need a cap. You might be prohibited from using the groundwater, but you can get certain state clearances at least to be able to use that property for certain things and certain protections. So the voluntary programs are really useful to a lot of folks. And the next two is just FIFRA and TSCA are two really specialized programs that just have to do with, like pesticides and PCBs, things like that would fall under those programs.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Who would, going to sites like that, you find out after the fact if the due diligence was done and you go to the volunteer state to clean it up, who's responsible to pick up the cost for that? Is there funding through the state, or is that all on the property?
I'll give you an answer, Tim. Lisa may give you a slightly different answer here from a legal standpoint. I'm going to say it's probably on you.
That's what I was.
It's Probably there may be maybe one out part of your due diligence that you did. What we'd like to try to do is get a disclosure of what activities, what went on, the institutional knowledge from the previous owner, and if that was answered appropriately and you basically ignored that, then that's on you. But if they didn't, if they maybe didn't give you some honest answers and hid that, but knew about the issues, then I think where legal counsel could potentially get involved with you for some litigation.
Yeah, but I don't think there's any state funds that are.
If you're an economic development agency, you have some options because there are some state funds out there from that standpoint. I think it's the industrial site reuse funding that's out there. I think Rob, you probably have dealt with that as well. EPA certainly has some brownfield funding that you'll hear usually about every September or so. You'll hear some information that comes out regarding funding to specific counties. But I certainly there's a little bit of that funding. But for your example, that's probably on you as the purchaser because you didn't do your due diligence. So I'll take a step back on the land recycling program as Lisa mentioned. I mean, it is a voluntary program, not for everybody though. So. I mean, for a cleanup, I mean, you come through, and you want to clean up a site for that, what I'll call the golden ticket, your environmental liability protection. But there are some industries that you are forced to go down that path. Storage tank owners being one. The oil and gas industry is another one. They are forced for any spills to get down, either to utilize standards set in the Act 2 program or to actually go through an environmental cleanup in accordance with the Act 2 program to get environmental liability. A lot of the DEP regulators are forcing energy companies to get down that path.
And sometimes when you buy a property, or if you're selling a property, I guess the buyer can require you to take the site through Act 2 as part of what your purchase is, and that could be part of what your sales contract includes.
Yeah, I mean it's a good program. So don't get me wrong on that. I mean it's a great program. We talked earlier before everybody got here about. I mean it was established in 1995, and Governor Ridge established that program in his administration, and it's been thousands of sites have gone through that closure, and it works. It worked in 1995. It still works today. I mean, it's a good program to try to encourage the reuse of old, unused or underutilized properties. I mean, it truly is a great program, and many sites throughout the city, throughout this county have gone down that path. So great program, and happy to have gone through that process many times. So.
How far back would it go? Say you purchase the property and everything's being appropriate, but then later down the road they find something comes up that to their knowledge was not their fault, and they need to take action to.
There's always reopeners. Maybe you can talk about that.
I don't know how far, but like say it's 5 years, 10 years, something comes up.
You mean you've gone through Act 2 and then something comes up? So your Act 2 coverage is only for what you put on your, basically what you disclosed you were cleaning up for. And so if something else is outside of what you were cleaning up for or risk assessing for or whatever it might be, then those would be outside of what your liability coverage.
Yeah, say you found that tank that we talked about earlier, Tim, that we didn't know about as part of this Act 2 closure
Right.
that Lisa's talking about, say it's for solvents or something. I mean, there was a dry cleaning facility or something there. But after that site closure completed, somebody said, we're putting in a new parking area and uncovered all this blacktop, found this metal top here, and found out that there's a tank there. And that absolutely would not be covered. So yeah, you'd have to go down the path of proper removal and site closure, and hopefully, knock on wood, that it wouldn't be a extensive remediation. So figured that you might enjoy that historic picture. That's one of my mentors who's now retired. His name's Bill Goff. Rob, you may have heard his name in the past. He retired about 6-7 years ago. This was a water well that our company drilled close to a landfill, and this was about 1980. And Bill wanted to prove to everybody that the water was safe to drink as a municipal well, and that's what he was doing there. So, but water and water quality management, once again, I mean, a world of acronyms for us to consider. Many that we've talked about on the NPDES side. I think that's the very basic that probably applies to almost any site development, any manufacturer, anybody that potentially has storm water or water coming off the property, or you're discharging water from a process. You're going to need that permit. So could be very, very minor obligations, but that is probably as basic as it comes from the standpoint of an obligation. Clean Water Act is a citation, federal citation that I mean, Lisa will tell you that almost any notice of violation that comes across from a water or water quality standpoint, it's going to cite the citation of the Clean Water Act will be in there.
And in Pennsylvania, the Clean Streams Law.
And that is a big one as well. Yeah, you think, well, we had one violation here. Well, one violation, all of a sudden, the citations of federal and state laws could start to add up. So the Oil Pollution Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, as Bill is trying to show that well is safe to drink. The Spill Prevention, Control and Countermeasure Plan. You want to talk about that real briefly?
Sure. So the SPCC plan is something that was started to be required under OPA, under the Oil Pollution Act, and it is a plan that you need to have if you have a certain amount of petroleum oil on site, whether it's above ground, it's 1,320 gallons. If it's below ground, it's 42,000 gallons. And so if you have those quantities of oil, then you need to have an SPCC plan. And the sort of the state equivalent of that is a PPC plan. A PPC plan is more broad, though. It doesn't just cover oil. And it basically is, both of them are basically your spill plan. If there's something that happens at your site and it has something to do with something that's stored or something that you use, those plans are where you would go to see what those processes are, those SOPs are, sort of, to be able to take care of it. And those plans, just from when an inspector comes on your site, those plans are just low-hanging fruit for them to just pull out and look at and see
pick apart.
Right. And if you're following them or you're not following them. So part of what I would do at a site is look at those plans just to see what you're promising to do and whether you're promising more than you need to. You're not promising as much as you need to, and trying to hit that balance between the two, make sure everything's updated, make sure your personnel are updated, because that's a big deal to me. It is.
Yeah, to me, I mean, if you go on the site, like Lisa said, and you look at this PPC plan, I mean, it shows, okay, how am I going to respond to a spill? How am I going to respond to an incident? it's going to have a list of contacts and kind of the tier of respondents for an incident.
Right.
Okay, if I'm going to call this phone number, am I going to actually, is this person still work at this company, or
that's how we went 5 years ago.
or is it a contractor, or do they know that they're part of this plan? Once again, it's back to being the Boy Scout, being prepared, and that's a big part of what those two plans are about. So.
But when that inspector gets on site, or if I come on site to audit, I'm sure if you come on site to audit, if I ask for those plans and those plans they look a mess, then I have a pretty good idea of how the rest of the day is going to go.
If a map, you say, is this the actual site? I mean, Rob, you've probably been through that to say, I mean, are you sure this is where we're at here? Because this doesn't look anything of what the site looks like.
But if
no, we updated this site 5 years ago, like Lisa said.
But if it's a good plan, and you look at it and it seems to make sense, and people seem to know what it's saying and where the documents are, the different inspection records and things like that, your whole level and your inspector's whole level of like,
they have this company.
Like here it is, like they will relax and they will feel much more at ease on what you're doing, and it will be a much smoother process than if you start off badly with bad plans.
Yeah, and once again, those people that are listing on those plans, do they know their role? I mean, maybe I'm the guy that's supposed to be the coordinator. Do I know everybody that's on my team, and do I have the utmost confidence that if I call them for an incident at this site, they know what to do? They're familiar with this site. You better, if you have it in this plan,
right,
to be compliant. So chapter 102, 105, I mean, those are two pretty big ones in our world and our clients' worlds. I mean, it applies to pretty much all of what we do, whether it's energy, site development, it all applies. And just a simple E&S plan, I mean, that is a big item that can easily get out of control from a compliance standpoint. Comments on
102 is more of the erosion and sedimentation side of DEP regulations, and 105 is the obstruction and encroachment, so kind of like called the stream and wetland side of it, and impacts to streams and wetlands is part of that. And then the nationwide permit and the Pennsylvania state programmatic general permit are the two of the intersections between the federal stream and wetland permitting and state stream and wetland permitting kind of come together there. So if you're doing something, if you have a new site, it's really important to have a consultant go out and look at it and make sure you don't have a stream or a wetland, because you may be looking at something and it may look totally dry and fine and all good, but it may not be. And people, I've had a lot of clients get whacked for that because they just haven't bothered to look, because they thought, oh, it's fine. And it's not. And there's new Supreme Court and new regulations on what a water of the United States is. And so you want somebody who knows what those definitions are, so that you can make an argument on why something isn't regulated, and try to make sure that what the Corps or the state is trying to regulate is reasonable and is in accordance with the laws.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, that bullet, I think, really can start trickling down into a lot of obligations.
That's $1 million bullet for a lot of people.
I mean, there is a ton of issues that can come from that, and then it trickles down into, okay, are we crossing a stream? Oh, you need a permit for that. That's a separate permit. I mean, there are so many subsets of that bullet item that come into play. So, the river basin commissions, I personally don't get into too much with the Ohio River Valley Sanitary Commission. you might.
Sometimes you can get a wastewater permit that has those limits associated with it. And the SRBC and DRBC are really active, much more active.
Yeah, I probably deal with the SRBC and DRBC much more than Orsanco. Honestly, from a withdrawal standpoint and a water well drilling standpoint, SRBC in my mind probably has actually a little bit more power than the DEP does. I mean, they're that powerful of an organization, and they're not afraid to apply their authority to users within the basin. DRBC is a little bit smaller of an entity, but still very similar model to the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. So, mentioned Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Index earlier. I mean, any site development, I can't remember, 1/10 of an acre or smaller, I believe you're required to
I don't even know.
Yeah, to conduct what's called a PNDI search, is an electronic search that you type in your coordinates or your site location, and it pops up whether you have some conflicts or not. And I cited the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, but there are plants and animal species that come up that if you have a conflict, you have to address that conflict. It may turn out to be nothing, and a lot of times that's the end result. But in a case like the Indiana bat, like the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, could be pretty intrusive and cause for some delays in your projects. And then the State Historic Preservation Office, I think that also has the ability to set back a project from the standpoint of getting a cultural professional out there, knowing that process can be very, very, very slow. So.
Yep.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
So I had a customer about a month ago. They haul unpasteurized milk from the farm to the dairy.
Okay.
They overturned their trailer full of milk, 64,000 gallons into the Susquehanna River. I insured quite a few milk haulers, none of which feel that a pollution policy is necessary. We always offer it, they never listen to take it. So, and I've done a little bit of research on, the effects of milk when it gets in the water and so forth. So just looking for your opinion on, we don't have a bill yet on what this is going to look like, but really what the effects of unpasteurized milk does have when it gets into the waterway.
Milk is the example in the spill.
You want to talk about that?
No, you go ahead. Go ahead. I just think that's so funny.
Yeah, there is I think they're calling it the Clean Streams Law spill policy, is what I refer to it as, where actually milk being spilled was the example the department gave in that policy in that spill policy document. I mean, I'm not making that up. That is absolutely true. But from the standpoint of impacts, spilled a product, it's going into a stream. Yeah, you probably have an obligation. Plus, you rolled over the if it was you said it was a rollover crash.
Yeah,
it's probably not the only thing that was spilled. Probably I mean, if it was sounded like it was a large truck, you probably need to do a little bit of due diligence. Did the diesel fuel out of the fuel tank? Was that tank punctured? Was it
finally there's a little bit of petroleum. REI was who did the cleanup.
Okay. Yep.
So yeah, I mean, what I had read on milk getting into the water was something about the effects of the oxygenation in the water and that can kill wildlife.
High pH.
Biological oxygen
Yep.
Be a problem there, and basically as the milk degrades, the oxygen in the water is used by the bacteria. You feed it in the water, that results.
And part of it is that under the Clean Streams Law, and under the Clean Water Act too, the definition of pollution or pollutant is so broad, it can be anything. So, you know, milk, it seems fairly innocuous as far as things that we see spilled, but
you're changing the water quality,
but
of the
it's
stream.
still a pollutant, and so there's still an actionable, you know, event as far as the you know, the agencies are concerned. You know, whether there's a really appreciable change in the actual water quality or not doesn't necessarily, I think it factors into, you know, what might happen to, but there's still a discharging of a pollutant into a waterway.
Yeah, granted, it probably would clear up very quickly, but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't doubt. I mean, as Rob talked about, I mean, there's a change of water quality that probably, you know, there's fish in that stream. It probably impacted that quality to the point of where it probably impacted the biological activity in that stream, at least temporarily. So I think it's an actionable response where, you know, if DEP responded to them, if you don't mind sharing. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. So
yeah, because this already I wrote this whole
large report. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a DEP violator.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I mean, there's right there, it's kind of that.
It's funny, I feel like I willed into existence because they reviewed in August, this claim happened 20 days after, and we offered them a solution. I said, well, like, listen, I mean, I know it's just no, like you said, but it doesn't really seem like something that can cause too much harm. So it's like, worst case scenario, catastrophic, you return trailer to the river. 20 days living up there. So I'm a little bit nervous what's going on like this. We have a good attorney.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's when I read the spill policy, I thought,
oh yeah,
who spills milk? But
yeah, exactly. I'm thinking, why are they using this as an example? Well, there you go. There's a So how to minimize compliance issues? I know we've gone through a lot in a matter of a little over an hour. So, I mean, I think that to minimize the compliance issues, I mean, it's truly about preparedness. I mean, it's about making compliance a priority, consulting professionals or in-house people that are tracking your compliance, but whether it's legal counsel or environmental professional like us, that to ensure that there's that compliance is addressed, then identify, understand, and fulfill obligations. I would also say engagement with regulatory authorities, being that proactive company to go out and say, we want to do the right things. We're coming to you, DEP, or we're coming to have a plan to go with your legal counsel to say, we're doing the right thing, and we realize that maybe we haven't been compliant in the past, but now we're heading down that path. And I know we had those examples of staying vigilant and complying with requirements, staying vigilant with keeping your plans up to date, and like I said, having that plan for the emergencies. I mean, having the PPC plan up to date, having the SPCC plan, if that's part of your requirements. Any company is going to have, I mean, I'm sure that Seubert has a plan in case of an emergency, whether it's cyber or whatever it may be. You have a plan for evacuation if there's an issue. So, but having that plan for your operations is so very important.
And I think to speak to this whole thing, I mean, this is kind of probably the most important slide, right? It's kind of
proactive.
There's so many different things going on in the world. project or whatever it is that an individual or a company is trying to do, this is just another cog in that wheel, right? It's another spoke in that wheel that you have to think about. And, really want to bring this to the forefront. This is really a process that has to happen. And these are, I can't say it enough, these processes, this process in particular is one that is so crucial. Because if you don't do the right steps, the back end can be potentially very bad. So, you have, there's two people in this room that are definitely professionals and understand how to minimize that and be proactive to minimize any kind of risk in this field or this particular topic going forward. But look, sometimes we say this, we're an insurance brokerage firm, right? We sell insurance, you buy insurance for a reason. When you have to use it. So there's still help out there when you run into a problem and you have to be reactive. There are still some levers that you can pull to be able to help to get through something like this. Yeah. So, while we might try to be ahead of everything, we can't stress it enough to get ahead of stuff. Stuff does happen, as we talked about.
But if you're prepared, that's part of mitigating the risk.
Right. And part of, to the point of when there is something that happens and you want to engage with the agencies, it's always, even when that bad thing happens and that spill, they may be out there, but to approach them and say, okay, here's how we propose to clean it up, or here's how we propose to do something, instead of waiting for them to tell you what they want you to do, it heads off a lot of potential disagreements later of what the scope of a cleanup might be, or what the scope of the obligations might be. So if you go in and say, we'd like to have a conversation with you, and before that conversation happens, you have your conversation with your consultant, you have your conversation so that we get some talking points and some themes, and here's
what we've done.
And here's
ready to address those issues.
Right. Like, here's what we've done. Here's what we're planning to do. Here's why we think that's justified. And, here's what we think is appropriate. Are you okay with what we propose? So, you're not putting your head in the sand and you're not saying, well, maybe nobody saw we spilled it. What you're saying is, we did spill it, that, but we don't think it was that bad. For these reasons, we took these samples, we did whatever we did, and then, and here's what we think needs to happen next. And approaching them with that, they really, I think, find that refreshing from having people that are, not that straightforward with them. And I think folks generally will try to work with you at that point to try to come up with something that is more agreeable than if you're just trying to kind of skirt around everything. Yeah. So having that initial conversation, like not just going in there blind and saying to the agency, I don't know, well, what do you think? What do you think we should do? Like, say, here's what we think. What do you think about our idea?
And many times they will come to, if you have that conversation where you're not prepared, where you're asking, what should we do? They're going to say, you need to engage with an environmental consultant. He'll tell you what to do. And then the environmental consultant is saying, well, I think this is it, but there's no guarantee that the department will agree with you on your direction. So.
And part of what they may say is, well, Chapter such and says you need a full evaluation of blah, 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 whatever it is. And that's when it's helpful to have somebody with you that says, but it says if necessary, you need that. But here's why we think this is necessary. And so kind of having somebody else who can kind of banter back and forth with them is really important.
Well, and as I said earlier, regulating by policy. The department tends to do that quite often. And many times where they will self-insert a shall where those shall shouldn't be shalls. They're usually not required. So, but you still have that regulatory obligation to follow through on issues. So. So why do we get called in? I mean, I think we've gone through a lot of this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it just comes down to some of what Brandon just talked about. I mean, being prepared. And a lot of these sites, Rob, you probably experience it. To me, it comes down to basics of lack of just good housekeeping. You come into a dirty site, whether it's a construction site where it's site development or it's a manufacturing facility or an oil and gas site. I mean, if there's just clutter and crap everywhere, that's going to probably, once again, go back to what Lisa said, probably going to wave the red flag and give me an idea of how this discussion is going to go. Because I think it's probably going to go very badly. But once again, not knowing or not following obligations of permits. I mean, playing the ignorance card, that just doesn't cut it. I mean, you just have to know what your obligations are on a daily basis. And then we talked about the not updating the required plans. I mean, that fourth bullet, I mean, I get a lot of those calls, those spills and releases, respond to them on a daily basis.
Keep in mind that a lot of the requirements to notify for a spill and release is really quick, couple hours. And so, couple hours goes by really quick.
Quantity dependent as well, dependent on the industry.
And where you report, is it only state? Do you have to report federally?
Yep.
And there's a lot of decisions that need to be made really.
Yeah, impacting a waterway. I mean, those are all items that,
if you have
that
a downstream user.
Yes, correct.
Lisa, can I ask you a quick question? I don't know if you deal directly with like CPAs or financial obligations reporting on this. How do you get away with lack of good housekeeping if you have financial statements that you need to share with the bank? You have to have disclosures about your environmental remediation any point in time, right?
Well, so I mean, whether you have a sloppy site or not isn't, I don't know, it's just how people tend to run it, but that's not necessarily a violation to have a sloppy site. It's just an indication that everything else you're doing maybe isn't, buttoned up the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, we'll show you. I've got a first example. We'll show, I think, the perfect example of that, of what you're talking about here. So,
to that extent, are you seeing companies proactively jump to, consulting more of these agencies or elements on the front end, knowing that it's what can happen, or is it most of the time, like an insurance situation where crap, I thought I had it covered, got hit with it, so now I need it. Is it more of that reactive?
I see them both sides.
I see both ways too. I mean, obviously, if I think where we see it from kind of the prior to a problem is when they're buying a new site or when they're building a new site. We see a lot of interest there in being able to start on a good footstep with everyone. Also, I've had sites where they've gotten in trouble at this facility and then they say, oh crap, we need to get, and so all of these other facilities they start to look at, and sometimes we enter into an environmental audit, a self-disclosure with the agencies, so that you have some protection from penalties for what you find in those. But those are probably, I would say, the three main ways that people get us involved. I would say at the very beginning, but I have clients that I do like day-to-day compliance for. I have this drum, what do I do with it? This happened to go down the storm drain, what happens now? All of those kind of questions come up. But then that big enforcement, that will usually be a letter, and there'll be people that I haven't, that'll be a new client as soon as that letter shows up. So it really does run the continuum of what people do.
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, it seems like that most of my clients are pretty proactive, but I do run into a few where, well, I'll have the example up here shortly, where maybe it's lack of internal resources. And, I'm doing so many other, I've got so many other we're undermanned, understaffed. I mean, common theme these days where, you know, we'll get to that compliance issue eventually. I mean, it's okay right now to the best of my knowledge, but we'll get to it. But it's lesser priority than some of the other things we're doing. So
I think the point of you saying voluntary element of that, again, the time delays the cost of this
sure.
coming into play. I see a lot more developers or otherwise kind of pushing that, but I didn't really see it.
Yeah.
Whereas if there was that type of advantage or assistance from, you know, and fund coming forward for that reason in that altruistic way, hey, we realize this, we want to get ahead of it.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that makes sense for a reason going forward. If it is going to delay or potentially, you know, kill a project based on timelines for additional costs, that would be, that's a tough conversation to try to.
Sure. Yeah, and those things are, I mean, compliance probably a little bit less visible than say like a safety related issue when you got folks that are out working on projects. Are they working safely? I think that's probably a heck of a lot more visible than a compliance issue that, okay, that doesn't affect me personally or my employees right now, but something dramatically changes, it will. And I mean, you made the perfect statement is, I mean, then all of a sudden it goes from a non-issue to where I'm calling Lisa and her team are involved with you and with everybody else, with environmental consultants, with the regulators, and that's when it really starts to snowball down the hill. So,
and if it gets really bad, you're also getting a PR person, because now there's a press release that says,
yeah,
such
XYZ
and such company
is, yep.
You know, spilled all of this, or they just got fined for this, or whatever it might be. And a lot of our stuff ends up in a press release somewhere along the line. And so,
and if you're a publicly traded company, that definitely doesn't look too good to your shareholders. So well, here's the example. So I know we got probably 5-6 minutes left, but this is a real life example that happened earlier this year. The EP comes knocking on a transportation company client of mine door after finding this condition in a local lake, real close to their facility. I think everybody can see that there's a little cloudy picture, but oily sheen on the water there. Definitely not a good situation when they didn't find it. The regulatory agency found it from a complaint. So, next slide, Jenna. So what happened? Root cause. We've done some work for this company, hadn't for a while. Looks like pretty bad housekeeping to me. I mean, not being prepared. I mean, no secondary containment with these drums, and there were a few other sections. I just chose this specific picture, but all the residuals coming from those drums and a couple other locations nearby went right to that drain. And of course, where'd that drain go? So I very frantic call from a client, as you can imagine. Rob, you've probably had a few of these calls in your careers where, I mean, the world is probably ending in their eyes. But just think of being prepared and doing a little bit of housekeeping, getting those drums out of the weather, getting those drums in secondary containment so there's no spills, or if there is a spill, it's all contained within that secondary containment. Would have saved them a lot of time, money, bad PR, and notice a violation from the EP. So,
machine is reportable. So
so that's a pretty simple one. Any questions on this one? I mean, anybody have any other ideas on maybe some things they probably could have been doing differently here? So knowing that. Yeah.
see you.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly welcome any other comments. That's, to me, that's about as basic as it gets there.
Yeah.
From the standpoint of just being prepared. So think this is yours.
Sure. So this one is just, all of a sudden you're at your facility and the inspector shows up. And what do you do when an inspector shows up? And then what do you do if they are inspecting your facility and they give you a notice of violation afterwards? The first question of what do you do when the inspector shows up is you cooperate and you let them in. I guess you can say no, but I wouldn't say no.
You probably wouldn't advise that.
They're coming back. We let them in. You try to be as cooperative as you can, give them the documents that they want to look at. And then when you get the NOV at the end, if you get an NOV and they have certain things that they want you to correct, it's important to do those corrections or at least provide a response to them within the time period. Usually it's like 15 days to be able to, convey to them, you heard what they were saying, you agree with it or you don't agree with it, depending on what happened, and you addressed it or you didn't address it, and the reasons if you didn't address it or when you're planning to address it. So you put all that into a response back to the NOV, because if you don't do anything and you just let them send you an NOV, even though it's not necessarily a final action, they're going to do follow-up and they're going to want to know what happened for that inspection that they did. So it's always better to be proactive and just send them a response back to it.
I think Lisa brought up a good example that many times this type of event really sparks either one of two directions. Either the client is DEP's no good, they're the Gestapo of Pennsylvania, I'm never going to work with them again. They will never get any cooperation from us, or we need to get our crap together and at all of our facilities. This just shines a light on some shortfalls we need to address, much like what Lisa talked about earlier. So,
Lisa, in that situation, does the organization or the individual have time to call their consultant or their attorney to be able to show up, or is it something where they're expecting we're going right now?
The inspection will go right then. You can call and if somebody's available or able to come join you, but that inspection's not gonna wait for you.
You can have them wait. Your manager or whatever.
Yeah, they're gonna move forward. I'd highly, as Lisa said, highly recommend that you follow them listen intently, but don't deny them access. So all that's gonna do is set up the barrier for further confrontation. So
right. And so those are just questions we talked about. Most of that is just what to do and where what to do next, and is what they're asking for, is it reasonable? Do you have arguments on why some of that doesn't need to be done or why some of that isn't a violation? Because you're really creating a record. If things go beyond this and it turns into an enforcement action, they're going to go back to that NOV and say, look, we said you found this, this, and this, and you would like to have your own piece of paper that says, you did say that, but we told you blah, blah, blah. And so you're creating some of that back and forth in case later on you need it as part of your arguments to refute a penalty.
I think this is the last example. So you want to start?
Sure. So this is, there's two scenarios. You have a new site and you want to build something new, or you have a facility and you want to add on to it and expand your processes, whatever it might be. And to do both of those requires thought ahead of time on what the permits are going to be and what the what those requirements are. I'm not going to talk about air, but if you have a whole new process, that can be a whole ball of wax on when you start construction based on what permits you need for that sort of thing. If you're going to do a whole new site that's a greenfield, you're going to want to look for your streams and wetlands and your endangered species, and you're going to cover that part of it. And so depending on what the facility is and what you want to do and where you're located, those are all considerations if there's something new that you're wanting to do. I have a site in Texas right now, and they want to put in a whole new process and a whole new wastewater stream. So they want to take it to the POTW, the wastewater treatment plant, and trying to get approval for that requires a number of different steps. They can't just flick the switch on their new process and just wash everything they want to down it. So it just depends what that scenario is.
And mentioning greenfields, then conversely a brownfield site, as we mentioned, I mean, to make sure, okay, are there any environmental covenants that we would violate if we put a blade of a excavator in the ground? I mean, are we allowed to disturb certain areas? Are there any restrictions on the property? Or, I mean, is it a statewide health standard closure where you can pretty much do almost anything on the property because you went through the most stringent closure of the Act 2 program? So,
and that can involve OSHA as well, depending on what you're digging into.
Correct.
I think those are our questions.
So I think, like I said, we're a few minutes over, but really appreciate the engagement within the room here. Other questions or anything that we can try to address here? So.
Okay.
Any questions in the room? Jeff, we greatly appreciate it. This is awesome.
Brandon, thank you very much.
Lisa, thank you so much.
And thanks to everybody for attending. So.
And hopefully this brought awareness. Again, we want to bring this back to the forefront, be more proactive, and start thinking about your environmental responsibility. We all have it as organizations, even as individuals. We're doing something at home. We have an environmental responsibility. Something happens after the fact, we have great relationships with both organizations here. Happy to share their information for the proactive, or even trying to be, and Lisa put it great, being proactive in a reactionary environment, right? Kind of counterintuitive, but it's something to help along the way. Dealing with these government agencies definitely can be scary, right? Having somebody beside your side that knows and understands, the song goes, when to hold them, know when to fold them. It's powerful, especially if in I heard somebody say an old trap moment earlier. So again, thank you everybody for attending, both in person and online, and everybody have a great day. Thanks again. We greatly appreciate it. Lisa and Jeff.
Yeah.
Thank you so
much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.